What's up, Shred Sexies? Welcome back to Up to the Fingers. Looks like that weirdo theory video I made kind of blew up a little bit, and there's some great comments over there. And so I wanted to address them with the guitar in hand kind of situation, at least make a credible argument without, typing out a paragraph, because I knew that was just going to sort of like turn into a shit show. So instead, because you can't really communicate ideas in the comments, right? So I appreciate all of the feedback. It's awesome, and you're absolutely right for 99% of it, but there's 1% of it that's a little off the mark. I wouldn't say it's wrong. You can be a very, very effective musician without music theory. You don't need it to either make it in the music industry or essentially be a good musician and actually make music that's compelling to people. But you'll hit a ceiling because there are limitations there. And that's all I'm trying to say. Some people reach for the stars. Other people are like, I'm more comfortable where I'm at. And there's, it doesn't really matter. It depends on the person, because ultimately at the end of the day, we got to remember music is incredibly subjective. So, one person's treasure is another person's trash. So food for thought there. We're going to get into some stuff. I'm going to talk about the solo a little bit and what I did there, because essentially you can hear that it's a self-contained piece of music. It didn't sound like me basically noodling all over the place, which is another big issue that people have basically been asking me about. So I'm going to kind of roll those into this lesson here, is how to avoid the noodling situation, but at the same time also make a credible argument for why I think you should learn music theory and why it's not a bad thing or nothing to be afraid of. An extra tool in the toolbox is preferable than to go reaching for it and be like, it's not there. So let's get into this lesson. All right, part one of this video here is essentially establishing the key that you're working in by ear. Okay, so when I started listening to this backing track, of course, I don't label them. It just got some song name on it. So I always have to figure it out, even though I've probably heard them 10 or 15 times now. I just have such a short memory span. I'm just like, what is it again? And here's the thing. This is essentially something you should do all the time, which is basically just go to a note that you actually think sounds like it would be in the proper range. And then from just that one note, construct the rest of the diatonic scale. So in this case, it ended up being in the key of C sharp minor here, right? So I've got my pentatonic, the classic, right? And of course that sets the table. Now all of a sudden, if I move up using music theory, I can know instantaneously we're in the key of E major, right? Which is going to put me here at this F sharp minor for the Dorian position. And then again, another sort of G sharp minor here for the third degree, right? Of course, A major for the fourth degree. These are also the positions, by the way. Then of course you got the fifth, the dominant seven there, of course, minor here at the C sharp minor, moving up one more time for the diminished, of course, and then the half step to get back to the root again, right? And so using that information, I have a whole bunch of new things that trigger, right? I've got this sort of E major in the open position. I know that this is the note E here. I got a D, which leads to the C, which leads to the A type, right? And leads to the G type. So again, music theory allows me to quickly orient myself on the instrument with all the chords, which also create the positions, right? If I'm moving here, second degree, Dorian. If I move here, Phrygian. And so on and so forth, right? Or maybe I'm doing the pentatonic stuff. I'm like, oh, there's the minor moving down a whole step. That gives me essentially the Mixolydian position. Or it might be like, oh, look, there's the five, there's the sharp five. Maybe I want to get into the harmonic minor, which is going to sound great in the key, right? So again, knowing music theory means that I can quickly identify the area. There's the first degree, second, third, half step to get to four, right? Then 5, 6, 7, and 1 again for the major scale. That stuff is incredibly important. And that prevents you from noodling too, because essentially now you're locked into being like, I should do something while I'm in this Phrygian position, which of course I do. And we're going to get into that. So that's basically part one. Basically land on a note and be like, in your mind, it's either going to be this or this. Okay, you have those three options with respect to a major scale. And job number one has to be is instantly know which one it is. And you start off being like, this is the note. The next note is either going to be a half step or a whole step. And so once you get to recognizing that, of course, by just simple process of elimination, you're going to know what the other one is. If it's a half step here, it's going to be a whole step. If it's a whole step, then it'll be a half step. Unless, in which case, it's two whole steps. And okay, so sorry, three options, my bad. But you get the point. It's up to you to basically be able to anticipate the next note in the sequence, whether it's in the key, diatonically speaking, meaning I'm just playing basically, you know, your standard sort of C sharp minor deal, or I move into like sort of the Dorian position. Okay, so knowing those two things obviously is going to be incredibly important. How to pick off a note inside the diatonic key, and then how to instantly build the key and use music theory to essentially lay out the fretboard, right? If you're like, okay, can you hear it? What was that one? You see what I mean? Like, that stuff is what gives you the wings to essentially do what I did there, move from one key to a sympathetic key, and then bounce back again. And that is essentially music. Just doing a bunch of noodling in the various positions, but always playing in the diatonic key sort of seriously limits you and your sound. And more importantly, in 2025, it doesn't work anymore. The kids and everybody, all the oldsters like me, we've all been seeing people do things that are absolutely amazing on the instrument and hearing new sounds combined together. It fundamentally changed the game. And so sure, if you're Van Halen or whatever, you can get away with it. But people like us, if you ever want to get engagement or have people listen to your music or sort of be like, that's a really killer band, in a live context, you need to be able to do these types of things. And the way to facilitate that is with music theory. Next. All right, part 2 here is about developing motifs and melodies. This is often overlooked in a solo situation. You have to kind of have a tool in the toolbox, if you will, to tie two sort of more technical parts together and also be able to create space in the solo. Otherwise, it sounds like a flurry of notes or it's really boring. And again, notice how I'm using different techniques thrown into the mix, but also fast, slow, right? So there's a whole bunch of music information. This usually comes when you study music and music theory. And you're like, okay, they're doing this here, but then you start to see these patterns develop and when you play hundreds of songs. And you're like, okay, it just basically gets baked into the cake with your thought process. So there is no real lesson. You just have to be exposed to thousands of solos and tons of music and stuff like that and basically develop your own sense of be like, this is cool. I like it when players do this. And then basically try to make that happen in your own terms. Right? But music theory, of course, is going to help you essentially figure out where you are. Obviously, in this case, I'm jumping up here. Right, so I'm just using that scale there to essentially play through the entire first section of it. And listen, there is no lesson I can give you to be able to develop melodies. You're like... Notice the vibratos, then slides and rakes together. Little micro bends there. Bends with vibrato, right? You see what I mean? When I play, I'm trying to concentrate on creating some sort of, you know, David Gilmour-esque type vibe, and countless other. Mark Knopfler's another one. There's all these classic rock guys that are basically the masters of doing this. Their solos, even though they're not even technically that hard, are basically legendary. Legendary. So there's a lesson to be learned there. The power of melody. As far as making your music memorable, as far as basically introducing an element to your writing process, and basically using simple music theory, you can now accomplish that by basically understanding the 3-note per string stuff. Right, in this case, I'm at the Phrygian position. And that Phrygian position nonsense comes from basically music theory, right? And you're like, you can keep going over and over. You're like, ascend, right? Where's Phrygian again? Oh, there's Dorian. Down to the Ionian, right back into the Aeolian position. Well, that puts me in this Ionian position. Might as well use the pentatonic again. Back through Aeolian and then ending there, of course, in Mixolydian. Notice I can basically envision this stuff in my mind because of two reasons. One, I've actually played these scales a trillion times. Two, I actually started listening to the sequence of notes. Just paying attention is really all you have to do to be like, okay, this next one. You know what I mean? Like in your mind, you can hear those notes descending. If you change it up, you're like again, the major sequence, right? Or you might do another one. So it's really important to understand that most of the time it's just people don't pay attention. I'm bombing here, whatever. You'll do stuff like this, which is awesome. Don't get me wrong. But it's limited in terms of actually teaching you, right? You should keep going down the fretboard. And of course, look at, when you do that, technically, again, you're doing superimposition. I don't think most people understand. That's the major scale. Instead of the Mixolydian position. Right? Of course, I played in the wrong place, but it doesn't matter, right? You get the idea. I actually took and replaced one scale with the other one. And so now that lick actually makes sense. You understand what you're doing. You're like, I can start off with this one. Where I'm factoring in this instead of this one, right? And basically knowing that helps you develop these motifs, right? You can kind of be like, so it's just a little sort of like speedier part before you get into the more sort of like emotive stuff. Right, notice again, you can do half bend into a whole step bend or the slide in before you go into the bend. Again, all of these little tools and mechanics coming into play to create melody rather than just sitting there and doing a lot of noodling, right? Try to organize your thought to be like, start here in this note. You're like, now notice I didn't go crazy there with the solo and smashed into the mic, of course. So video's just turning into a train wreck, but there's some pretty juicy parts here, so I'm just going to leave it in there. I think you start to get the picture there. That's how you develop motifs and melodies. It's just by using the template of 3 notes per string, of course, some basic music theory, and being like, you probably don't want to start on something too saucy, right? And try to target notes now to be like the 1st degree sounds killer to start on, the 3rd degree sounds killer. What degree is this? What degree is this? When you start playing it and be like, oh, okay, you know what I mean? That's where music theory starts coming in. It helps you decode the fretboard. Because you'd be like, look, it's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3. Oh, I'm playing the 3rd degree here. 3, 4. And of course, the 3rd degree of this E major, I was going to say G major, right, is going to sound killer because it's part of the E major triad. Again, music theory, basically filling in the gaps and giving you the opportunity. Now let's talk about some of this technical nonsense. And really, we're just going to concentrate on the arpeggio sequence because I want to show you a basic principle with similar scale shapes, in this case, arpeggio shapes, and how that can be incredibly effective. And again, using music theory to map out the fretboard to be like, I'm in this position. Ergo, I can now play this particular sort of arpeggio or scale. Let's do it. All right, let's wrap up with these arpeggios here. Essentially, I'm starting off on the 4th degree of the E major scale, right? So here, using music theory, I'd be like, okay, why not play the major 7 raised 11? The chord inherent, if you will, to the Lydian position, which kind of sounds like this, is tricky. It's got that weird sort of like, you know, tension-filled suspended sound that Steve Vai is very famous for, right? So I'm just converting that chord, if you will, into an arpeggio. Since it's the 4th degree half step down using music theory, I'm now into the Phrygian position. Right, and I'm going to keep it going. Just the minor 7 there. I'm like, oh look, I can jump up to the Aeolian position now and play the exact same one. And from here, I'm just using this 3 notes per string Mixolydian position there, basically to fill in the last little bit and take the tension off. Right, stuff like that is incredibly important, and it just doesn't come to you unless you actually practice this stuff over and over and over again, right? So that's me basically using the major 7 raised 11 here at the 4th degree. Notice I don't even need the note names. Sure, I could say it's A major 7 raised 11, but I don't care. This is the 4th degree of the E major scale as far as I'm concerned. I see it as 4. So I don't care about what the notes are. I care about the notes when I'm composing music and stuff like that, but as far as the improvisation stuff is concerned, no, I don't do that. I just be like, this is 4. Because I can do a whole lot of stuff at 4. Right, I can be like this. Dominant 7 arpeggio. Maybe I want to do the standard major triad. In this case, I'm like, might as well do this. Oh, look, where does that come from? Yeah, of course, Phrygian, right? So again. Okay, notice this note, very nice to end on type situation. Of course, that puts me immediately into Locrian 3 notes per string. In this case, this is actually from the Aeolian position, right? But this is the Locrian position, which is why I'm saying this is now part of the Locrian position, because these 3 notes overlap perfectly with the Locrian position. When I'm thinking about it as an arpeggio, I'm thinking Locrian. When I'm thinking about it as a scale, I'm basically thinking Aeolian. Okay, so very important distinction that you can flip and sort of like quickly move through these systems so that you pair up the right system. So when you're working on stuff, you're like, I'm good to go. Notice again, in this situation, after I do that, I basically play another little melody section here. Right? Using the major scale. There's Dorian, right? Of course, starting on the E here, which of course now lets me get a little bit of breathing room in there, so then I can finish it off with this little flurry here of doing the major 7 variant in the root position here, right? Oh, that's major scale territory. Right, so and then from the Dorian position, right? Again, I understand that it's going to be tricky for some people to be like, man, I can't keep up with that. But that's just it. You can't keep up because you haven't actually trained yourself to be like, this is the 3rd degree, this is the 2nd degree, that's the 1st degree of this scale. There's 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You're not comfortable with that scale system enough to be able to just be like, land on a note and be like, notice, I don't even have to look. My mind and my ear perceives this information, and they're like, there it is. And then I just fill in the blanks automatically. The human brain is insane. Okay. And for a long time, I tried to force or fight against this sort of letting go and releasing the force, if you will. I don't know how else to do it. Think of the scene in Star Wars where Luke Skywalker's got the blast shield down and he's trying to fight the little droid and it's zapping him in the hands or whatever it is. And then finally at the end, he's like, oh, okay, I could feel the force there. That's what you have to do too. Stop being self-conscious about it. Just release and be like, go with your gut instinct. But at the same time, try to be like, where am I when you land on this note? And then be able to do something based on it, right? Right, and there it is. Once you start doing that over and over and over and over again, all of a sudden you have this incredibly powerful tool to essentially unleash your full potential on the fretboard. It's as simple as that. And again, some of these things only come to you when you actually know where you are. A lot of people just jump on this note. They're like, I have no idea what that is. They may know that it's part of the scale, and they'll play more scales, which automatically eliminates the idea that you could be like using arpeggio now, or maybe a little more sauciness, you know what I'm saying? Or whatever it is. Or maybe you're like using the major 7, of course, in the 2-string configuration. Again, 3 and 4 here, right? So putting it all together here, the first step is just start on a note and be able to figure out the key. You're like, okay, I'm in the minor pentatonic. From there, you're like, oh, I'm in this scale system. Mixolydian, Lydian, Phrygian, Dorian, back into Phrygian, back into Lydian, back into Mixolydian. That's Locrian. Major scale, that's Locrian, and then finally ending in Mixolydian after I just kind of drifted through a little bit of Aeolian there. If you can't do that stuff at a much slower speed and with confidence, either using the minor pentatonic scales and the major scale stuff, that's where you got to start until you can do what I just did there without looking. That'll take you about, you work at it a couple of years, but you'll be good. If you're really dedicated, you can get it in about a year. And then it's just a question of how much you work on technique and stuff like that to get it faster. And that's that. And then afterwards, you need to be able to take that information once you've fleshed out the fretboard, if you will, and start to manipulate it in a way to use it for melodies, right? You're like, coming from the cage system there. You're like, oh, look, there's Lydian. Right, so on and so forth. I get it. It's a little daunting at the beginning, but it's very important that you actually practice stuff like that. Just start on a note, give it some vibrato, a little bend. Nice, simple little self-contained music idea. No shred. Take chances. You know. Me going outside the key, going back in the key there, getting carried away here. I shouldn't do that. But again, notice I make mistakes all the time. Doesn't stop me. I just keep going. I don't get self-conscious, be like, oh, go back to the beginning again. No, that's a terrible idea. Obviously, when you're playing live, you just got to keep going. Oh, I made a mistake. Send me your complaint here. So, I mean, come on, take it easy. And essentially at the end, you're like, I want to basically build melodies, right? You're like, get on a landing note there and then be like, blend melodies and the sort of shreddier parts together. You're like, where am I? Oh, that's Phrygian again. That puts me at Dorian. Oh, that puts me at Locrian there. Why not do the... Ooh, moved into F sharp major there, right? Again, there's Locrian. From the last lesson, there's the arpeggio. Sorry. That's a pretty interesting sequence there. See how I just mapped that out? Notice I'm in a new key center here. Oh, I'm going to use the major scale. Where am I now? Locrian, major scale, Dorian, minor pentatonic. You're like, oh, I'm going to do an arpeggio here. That was me doing a sort of fancy version there. Struggling there a little bit with those slides, but there it is. Basically, you're doing the same thing. You saw me use some of the stuff from the previous lesson there to a certain degree, factoring it in at the same time, doing these sort of compound arpeggios, climbing down the fretboard. There's all kinds of juicy stuff in there. And listen to me, the big takeaway from this lesson, if you've made it to the end, is that you have to basically, number one, commit. But number two, basically use every advantage that you have to create new opportunities for yourself to practice stuff. And that usually comes from understanding music theory. And then all of a sudden your playing goes to the next level because you have way more choices. You're not just going to go sort of like every single time, which is good. You're going to be like, now that's me basically doing another compound arpeggio, but slipping out of the key there until I got down to the Phrygian position, and then I brought it back into the key again, music theory. So borrowing sympathetic triads from other keys, you're not going to learn that by just playing. Sometimes you have to be shown the way, and there it is. So just keep practicing and don't get too uptight about being like, oh, well, I'll never get that good. You'll never get that good thinking that way. You'll get good when you're ready to sit down, commit, and think about what it is that you're doing and use every tool at your disposal to elevate yourself in your learning experience. No one else can do this stuff but you. So you have to be the one to be like, get it done. See you in the next one.